So one final point. Though Nozick himself was the opposite of political conservative,
I think you can tell.
Yes, in most of his views and attitudes, the libertarian element is part of the ideology of modern conservatism, and with the rise of free market conservatism in the 70s and 80s, Anarchy, State and Utopia was sometimes seen as providing that aspect of the movement with a philosophical foundation. So, the modern conflicts, in many respects, of the conservative coalition have in part germinated from this book, and you can see how the permissive social liberalism packaged in with some modern conservatism, as we see with the entirety of the Conservative Party currently being subverted by know-nothing 20-year-olds, has had philosophical legitimacy granted to it by some of the premises created here by Nozick. And that's why I think one of the letdowns of the later section is he does not create an affirmative vision, only a framework for coexisting communities.
Yeah, I think you can really see how the influence of this and the subversive influence of the New Left translated into the late 1970s and the 80s in America through Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had fantastic rhetoric, but all he ended up doing was privatizing a few industries, which in practice meant handing out benefits to his buddies and the industrial military complex, and then starting a bunch of wars, which nobody wanted. And then he also... what was that last one? Oh, yeah, he kept signing into effect and officializing all of the 60s reforms that the leftists and revolutionaries had been fighting for. For instance, there's that great speech where he talks about abortion. There's that great speech where he talks about how, isn't it strange that if the baby's out of the womb, if they're still in the womb and you assault the woman, you get an extra charge because you've hurt the baby, whereas if the woman goes to a doctor, then it's perfectly fine. Great rhetoric. Fantastic. However, when Reagan was in office as governor of California in the 1960s, one, he signed into effect no-fault divorce laws. Two, he signed the most liberalizing abortion laws the state had ever seen up to that point. So he was just kind of a continuation of that, and the moral permissiveness that's come about because of it, I think, is a direct result of this subversion, and conservatives, for the most part, just being too politically stupid to recognise it.
Hence why this book club will be succeeded at some point with a book club with Hans Hermann Hoppe, who decides to make a much more affirmative cultural as well as practical vision for libertarian self-associative communities.
Hoppe very based. Hoppe may be an anarchist, but he's made it very, very clear that he basically he's like, right, as long as we can go back to some form of normalcy, that's all I want. He's like,
as long as the gay commies leave me alone, I don't care.
Yeah, he's basically like, if we can go back to pre-revolutionary France, that kind of social order, I'm happy, okay?
We won't spoil our opinions on that. So, Nozick, his opening line: individuals have rights, and there are things no person or group may do to them without violating their rights. So strong and far-reaching are these rights that they raise a question of what, if anything, the state and its officials may do. How much room do individuals leave for the state? The nature of the state, its legitimate functions, and its justifications, if any, is a central concern of this book. A wide and diverse variety of topics intertwine in the course of our investigation. Our main conclusions about the state are that a minimal state, limited to the narrow functions of protection against force, theft, fraud, enforcement of contracts, and so on, is justified. That any more extensive states will violate persons' rights not to be forced to do certain things, and that is unjustified. And that the minimal state is inspiring as well as right. Now, that last one is what the concern of the third part is, because he does recognise essentially the narrative power that collectivist movements have in galvanizing mass amounts of people to fight for their cause, even if it doesn't end up being in their own self-rational interest.
Yeah. I think one thing that's always left out of these, and it's understandable because this sort of thing was written in the era before mass immigration, is that you need to also specify that the state should have a strong hand in protecting the borders and national security of whatever people that they're overlooking.
And an investment in the continuation of its own domestic population as well. Because it is a self-defeating axiom to be ambivalent to the idea that your people are culturally and medically depopulating themselves by not forming relationships, using birth control in excess, using abortion in excess, even if that is their autonomous, self-governing right. Specifically with libertarians, depending on if you give personhood rights to the baby or not, being either an innocent person or on the nebulous grounds of sentience.
Would you like me to tell you Rothbard's ideas of
Please
abortion?
do.
They're ridiculous. He completely skirts over the idea of personhood within the with the unborn child, which is kind of funny because given that he talks constantly about first principles and stuff, you think that he would want to try and apply that logic to that, or at least determine whether he's going to consider the fetus a child or just some kind of invader. Either way, he says that what the fetus is, what the unborn child is just a parasite on the woman, and it should be treated as no differently than if somebody broke into your house, which is remarkable logic to use because, once again, it's so obvious that what has happened is he came at it from the approach of, I want abortion to be legal. Who knows why? Rothbard never had children himself, so perhaps he just didn't see the value in children because he didn't have enough exposure to them. And then just divined reasons to justify it from there. Similar, as I mentioned, to what Nozick does about his vegetarianism, which, if you don't mind, I'll just go over very quickly.
We'll divulge to that part, yeah.
Because it does, once again, it does, I think it really points out the flaws in the praxeological method when you're applying it to morality rather than just purely, okay, how does the economic laws work? Which is that he asks, should there be limits on the way that we treat animals? And Nozick is a vegetarian. I made sure to look it up because he was writing like one. And I thought, okay, I need to check this. And I confirmed that he was. And he's saying it's, similar. We need to compare it to how we treat humans.
Yeah.
And that's immediately that's the wrong footing because humans are humans, animals are animals. Why would I apply the same rules to them when animals aren't humans? Blah, blah, blah. He takes the example of Scruton's argument that it's fine to eat animals because by farming the animals so that we can use them for meat, we're giving them lives that they never would have lived in the first place, which I think, I love animals, but I think that's a perfectly justifiable reason.
I think it's a utilitarian reason, and you don't even need to argue that. Instead, you can just argue that everything humans do is, by its nature, anthropocentric. Otherwise, it's suicidally misanthropic, and it would defeat the point of rights violations. So to argue from the perspective of outside the species, from a perspective we cannot know, because neither do we have the technology then or now to determine the level of animal sentience, is a self-defeating maxim that wouldn't align with other rights violations ideas. So it's completely pointless to talk in the preferential interest of expanding the parameters of the moral constituency when they're not human by definition.
That's all fair, but once again, that's the argument that he's responding to.
Yes.
He gives the Scruton argument, and then he says, well, you wouldn't just have a baby for 3 years just to sacrifice it, would you?
No, because they're human.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. That's a great point, Nozick. I wouldn't, but guess what? My baby is not a cow. My baby is a human. So of course I wouldn't do that.
It's going to make an amazing YouTube clip. I can't wait.
I know,
he actually says
it's once again it's tortured logic so that he can wrap himself back to the conclusion that he already arrived at before he started.
Yeah, well, he sets up this insane moral dichotomy again, expanding the parameters of moral consideration to encompass other species by saying what you have by not being a vegan or vegetarian is utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people. Yes, because animals are incapable of manifesting the categorical imperative. Try explaining libertarianism to a fox in a henhouse. Not going to work.
Well, there's another problem that he has, which is he assumes that human beings, like animals, because we recognize a certain sentience in them that gives them rights, which is, I was going to say bollocks, but I've said bollocks now, fair. Which is bollocks.
It's affective and subjective.
Well, it's just very easy to explain why it is that humans like animals outside of, it's because we recognize the inherent worth and they've got rights that we need to respect. No, it's because they remind us of babies. That's literally why. When you see a cat, it's got big eyes, it's got a small head, so the eyes look even bigger, which is really cute, and humans identify that with babies. They even tuned their meows, evolutionary, to hit the same frequencies as babies crying, so it hits that paternal and maternal instinct within you. We look at it and go, baby, I should probably protect that. That's the only reason why.
Are you telling me that Anna keeps sending me videos of cute Highland cows because she's getting broody?
Maybe, or maybe just because women automatically have a more maternal instinct anyway, so they see something that reminds them of a baby and go, oh, that's adorable, and maybe they want a baby extra as well. Why do you think there's all the women out there who are like 15 cats, calling them my fur babies? Because, I mean, biologically speaking, they're activating a similar reaction and response from the woman when they see them.
The hilarious thing about as well, anthropomorphizing, sorry, in the verse, personifying, no. What's the word where you treat animals as if they're humans? The Animorphs books, I guess. He uses the example of what would happen if aliens came to Earth and was more superior beings than us and treated us like animals. So he actually says, we also might imagine people encountering beings from another planet who traverse in their childhood whatever stages of moral development our developmental psychologists can identify. These beings claim they all continue on through 14 further sequential stages, each being necessary to enter the next one. It's a bit long-winded, but there you go. They cannot explain to us, primitive as we are, the content and modes of reasoning of these later stages. These beings claim that we may be sacrificed for their well-being, or at least in order to preserve their higher capacities. Do our moral views permit our sacrifice for the sake of these beings' higher capacities, including their moral ones? The issues do not concern whether superior beings may sacrifice us for their sakes, they also concern what we ought to do. For if there are other such beings, the elitist hierarchical view does not collapse into the Kantian side constraint view as far as we're concerned. A person may not sacrifice one of his fellows for his own benefit or that of another fellow, but he may sacrifice one of his fellows for the benefit of the higher beings. No, Robert, because they're not human. Again, it's all in the human preferential interest.
And the funny thing there is that whole diversion, basically, which is one of the things that makes this book quite difficult to get through, because he starts on these questions, then comes up with some nonsense thought experiment to go around them. He seems like the sort of person, if you had a conversation with, he'd be irritatingly pedantic. He really would. He comes up with this, and it's like, well, why would I expect aliens to treat me as if I was one of them? I'm not. I'm human. They'd be an alien. Obviously, from their perspective, if they thought that we were lower life forms than them and tried to kill us, I can't come up with a rational argument against that. I'm not going to convince them the same way as if we went out into space and found some primitive species out there. I'm sorry, we probably would end up doing bad things to them because they're not human beings, and why would we be expected to?
And they would probably throw whatever the alien equivalent of spears are back at us because we're an invading force. So
this is just reality.
Yeah,
this is how things work.
We're not trying to negotiate with the alien super beings when they cull us. Instead, we're going to take the M'Baku position and say, kill the fishmen.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.